Hi, everyone. I'm so excited for today's conversation. I've known Tammy since freshman year of college when I met her at auditions for one of Princeton's coolest dance groups. In addition to discovering Tammy as a killer dancer, I discovered she is a data science queen. So she won the thesis prize her senior year for Imperial Economics and became a data scientist at Quora after graduation. Fast forward to today, Tammy was employee number 25 at Watershed, joining as their second data scientist. She then became a PM and helped ship many of Watershed's core data products. And for the last 2 years, Tammy has managed a team of data scientists, climate scientists, and engineers to build the core methodologies and databases that power Watershed's reporting. And soon she'll be switching back to another PM role at Watershed. And lastly, for those who don't know Watershed, it's one of the fastest growing companies in climate tech. Watershed builds software that helps businesses measure, report, and reduce their carbon footprint. They've raised from Sequoia, Kleiner, Green Oaks, Elad Gill, most recently at a $1.8 billion valuation, and serve companies like Airbnb, Stripe, and Sweetgreen. So basically one of the coolest climate tech success stories out there. Now that I've given the long resume version, let's dive into the real story of how you end up joining Watershed. But Tammy, welcome to the pod and thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Sarah. I am super excited to be here, and we'll probably get into this later, but Sarah is a big reason and a big person I have to thank for helping me find Watershed, so this feels very full circle. Thank you.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, maybe going back to the beginning of the Watershed journey, why did you end up choosing Watershed and sort of what convinced you that it was the right choice at the time?
So at the time, this was back in 2020, 2021 is around when I started looking. I was confident that I wanted to work in climate tech as a field. I spent almost 9 months searching for the role that would be a good fit. A bunch of really great resources also for anybody who's looking to work in climate. There's Work in Climate, there's climatebase.org. But at the time, it felt like it was difficult to both work on the mission and kind of get all the other things that I would normally look for in assessing an early stage startup. So, how could I both work on climate and a mission, but also get a high growth startup with amazing people where I feel like I could learn a lot? That was something that was really difficult to find. And Watershed was the first place where I felt like I could have my cake and eat it too. That was apparent from kind of day one in the interview process. And I think this is the theme throughout, which is people was definitely the number one thing that convinced me to make the leap. It started at the beginning of the process when I found Watershed. Actually, I had a really momentous weekend where I got a text from Sarah saying, I know you're looking at climate companies. Have you heard of Watershed? I've heard great things. I got another text from my other friend who said, hey, I just heard about this company. You might be interested. And finally, I heard that somebody I'd worked with a lot at Quora, Jackson Mosinine, had just joined Watershed. So that kind of clinched the deal for me of great people have either recommended or started to work at this company. The process, it was similar. People were amazing, super great. And so that's really what convinced me that this was the right company to join.
I actually do remember when I texted you and you were like, someone else just told me about it. So it's crazy how that kind of played out. And I guess for any founders listening, what did Watershed do right in convincing you to join or anything that stood out during the recruiting process?
An amazing closing process. Super high touch, super fast. At that stage, I think basically every conversation I had within the same day, I got another touch point to move on to the next round. During the closing process, I had multiple people reach out, text, email, offer to chat, take me for walks. I think the kind of quick velocity of the process plus all of the personal touch points at the end was what sealed the deal really quickly.
Good tips. And I know prior to Watershed, you were at Quora, which was a much later stage startup at the time. What did you take from your time there that you kind of applied to the search process when looking at new roles?
Yeah. Um, I think two things, and these maybe are less about the later stage startup, but just about getting more work experience and figuring out what you want in terms of number one, it was super clear that people over everything. So people over the exact problem space, over the exact role. When I joined Watershed, actually, the role was a mix of data science and also customer facing kind of data analytics.
Hmm.
The customer part wasn't something I'd done before or thought was really a fit, but it was so clear this is the place I have to be. I'll do whatever to be here. And the second part was definitely around make sure it's something that you love doing. One of the reasons I left Quora was in feeling less of a connection with the mission, and I think realizing, hey, the kind of shiny name or the great caliber of the problem space and kind of the tools available, that's not enough to kind of keep me there. I mean, it
Mhm.
felt like people and really loving the mission were super important to look out for.
And so now, fast forward, you joined Watershed. Take me back to the first few weeks. What was it like to be just one of two data scientists? And how did you both figure out what to work on without basically that much precedent?
It was pretty crazy. I remember we had this tradition called the first day ship at Watershed, which we still do today, but basically every new hire, you have to ship something on your first day. It
Oh,
can be
that's cool.
small. Yeah, it can be like a polish bug. It's also a great kind of test that our dev environment is good enough to set up in an actual single day.
Mm.
But the kind of first day ship I had was I shipped an actual, data artifact to a customer. We were doing their measurement and my spin up buddy was like, hey, you're doing this. Write the SQL, press send. All right, it's live. Like the customer's got something delivered to them. And I think that kind of encapsulates both how quickly things move, but also how much trust was given. I'd summarize my first, probably 3 months there as I would ask somebody a question about how do we do something? What's the right process? And they'd say, I don't know, you decide. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, got it. Like I can actually own this. No one else is owning it. I'm expected to come up with an answer. And I think that really encapsulated the experience of being that early.
Yeah. That's super cool that they do the first day ship. It's kind of like people talk a lot about quickest time to value for customers, and it's like that experience for new hires. So that's a good tip. I think I'll steal that one for our portfolio companies.
Nice.
Awesome. And if you could give advice to someone who's early in a function, what would it be like? How should they think about hitting the ground running and structuring that first year?
I think my first tip would be to spend a lot more time listening and figuring out the particular context of that new company before implementing any changes. Especially for something like data, where it can mean so many different things at different companies. I think a lot of my beginning kind of few quarters was just understanding what's the role of data at Watershed in particular, what challenges are here that aren't elsewhere, or vice versa. A really simple example is I came from Quora, where obviously with consumer data, you have a ton of experimentation and much bigger sizes of data. And Watershed as a B2B SaaS company is never going to have the same kind of needs around experimentation or scale. The second thing I'd say is just a tip is that early decisions are really sticky. It's funny how many things I realized we kind of just decided, kind of the same way I mentioned of, what do we do? I don't know, make a decision. Okay. That are
Yeah.
still around 4 years later. Some of those are good decisions I'm glad we made, and others I'm like, oh, I definitely didn't put the consideration into it, thinking that it would last 4 years into the future because it's just hard to change processes or decisions. So look out for trapdoor sticky decisions is my big tip.
Yeah. And can you think of an example of an early decision that you made that stuck that you are glad happened?
That's a great question. Early on, we instituted a correctness instant process. So, kind of instants are really normal in engineering. You have or something, you need to figure out how to quickly tackle it, assess, remediate, etc. Early on, we kind of broke out correctness incidents as their own class of incident. And this was around not just, is the website down, but actually have we made a mistake in a user's reported emissions numbers that we've calculated for them. Breaking them out as their own class of incident meant that we kind of paid a lot more special attention to them. We had a really high bar for, hey, like maybe it was off by, an emissions factor was off by zero 0.1 or someone fat
Mhm.
fingered a sig fig at the end of it, but that's still a correctness incident. And so we had a really high bar up front. And over time, we figured out how to balance that with, the kind of demands as you scale, and you need to be able to detect and prevent more of these at scale and much earlier on. But our early emphasis on, no, actually, this is a type of incident that we're going to break out, treat differently, and make sure is taken really seriously for our customers. It's actually infused a lot of that culture now, where we care a ton about the numbers as we should. But I think that's been a good cultural legacy.
Yeah, that's a great example. And how did you and your colleague know when it was time to hire more data people?
I think the most obvious indicator was when we started having people spin up solutions, even though they weren't data people, to data problems. So, for example, we had engineers who were trying to build predictive models, which they did a great kind of first round, but then it was clear, okay, this is an actual problem. We need someone with kind of more expertise to come in with analytics. And I think in that realm, you kind of have the standard pyramid of data maturity, where it was clear we had, started to collect data and we had systems for logging. But then once we started wanting to do the next thing, it became really obvious that it was hard to do unless we had somebody come in and centralize the effort.
And then as the company grew, curious to dive more into how you grew with the company. I feel like one of the hardest things for founders is how to keep the early talent that they are able to attract. And you've been at Watershed now for wait, how long?
4 years.
4 years. That's long for a startup tenure. So I'm curious how you've been able to grow with the company and how they've been able to keep you excited. And so I know you went from IC to PM to people manager. What was maybe most hard about each transition?
Yeah. And side note, I think that's become my most recent piece of underrated career advice for people who ask me. I'm like, everyone talks about kind of hopping between startups companies, but actually, I found a ton of career growth and momentum from staying in the same place and having that compound. Um, but yes, transitions, I think for context, I'm somebody who really enjoys being a generalist and being at the intersection of data and product and people stuff. But I think what I realized was going from an IC who's really product oriented in thinking or people oriented in my thinking is different from actually owning and being accountable for the whole product or all of the people.
Mhm.
And so I think the hardest part was just realizing that. It's kind of was it the Dunning-Kruger curve? When in the beginning you're like, oh, I kind of understand what this is about. And then you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much. Going through that, being comfortable with that motion of being a beginner again. So just really the kind of emotions of taking on a new role and feeling confident about that still.
And with each of those moves, how did you decide to make them? Were they more suggested by the company? Did you raise your hand for it? I feel like people sometimes feel stuck but don't know what to do. And so curious how you navigated that.
My advice probably correlates with exactly the kind of size of the company as I was making each of these, which is my first move of wearing more of a PM hat was because we were still pretty small. There wasn't somebody playing the job. I was curious. I wanted to do it. I had somebody who was willing to kind of mentor and give me advice. So kind of more raised my hand and it was like, okay, no one's doing it. So, you do it kind of energy of an early startup. Later, when I became a people manager, that was in a slightly more mature phase of the company. But what had happened was I was leading a team and then was asked, do you actually want to manage the team? We're starting to build out our management bench. And actually, you're kind of already doing it. So why don't you just take on the additional aspects? At the time, I wasn't sold. I wanted to definitely be a manager, but I figured it was both a really good career opportunity and not quite trapdoor, but just a bit of, okay, it's kind of hard to get this opportunity.
Mm.
If there's the right time, right place with the right opening on the bench, like, let me try this.
Yeah.
And now with my recent shift, that's going to happen back to being a product manager. That one is much more around me raising my hand and saying, actually, I think I want to be growing in this direction for the next stretch. When I think about what I like, which is very vaguely leading and doing data and product things and building software and climate, feels like the next set of things I want to round out is back on the product side, on the interacting
Mhm.
with go-to-market side. And so that one was much more me raising my hand and saying, hey, what can we do? What kind of opportunities are here where I could achieve that?
Yeah. And I'm sure there's been things that you've had to unlearn too as the company grows, and things that made a lot of sense and worked in the early days, but maybe aren't as effective as the company scales. So wondering what are some things you had to unlearn as the company scaled from 25 to now hundreds of people?
I am someone who is a huge Slack lurker, and so especially when the company was smaller, it was so easy to lurk in all the Slack channels, figure out quickly when that doesn't scale. So I have to really choose the channels I choose to lurk on and kind of stay informed in. Just the scope of what I can keep up with obviously changes. And then the other thing is around, we had an interesting phase around Series B where actually we grew so quickly. I think the perception is if you're at a company for a long time, then kind of you're the old timer, you know everybody, you continue to get
Mhm.
to know everybody. We definitely had a period in the middle where there were so many new people. It just like I felt like it was flipped. I was like, oh, I kind of almost feel like a new person because I don't know all these faces and I have
Mm.
to relearn these faces and kind of reestablish connections. So I think kind of learning that, oh yeah, it's not just I already know everybody. It's wait, I have to continuously continue to keep and maintain and make new connections as new people join.
Yeah. I'm also a Slack lurker, so that would be very difficult for me. Are there any stories that stand out to you as key moments in terms of Watershed being able to build and maintain its culture, or how they've been able to establish themselves as the market leader in this space.
I have a funny story and then I have a slightly more serious one, which is the funny story is really early on, people decided that the duck was going to be the Watershed mascot. There was a
Mm.
whole discussion. This predates me even, but there was a whole thing around what's the right, like, do we need a mascot? What's the point of a mascot? And people were like, no, yes, it builds culture, it builds unity. And there was a whole decision process. I think someone advocated for beavers, but
Mm.
ducks won out as, watershed, aquatic animal. They're
Yeah.
cute. You can like make emojis with them. And then we had a whole set of operating principle duck emojis. For example, one of our operating principles is be customer obsessed. It's not like a customer obsession duck. It's like ducks like chasing each other. Anyway, I'll just say ducks have kind of been a constant thing, but there's been
Mhm.
multiple iterations. So we had the duck mascot, we had the emojis. People use them to like celebrate people in Slack. We had the Golden Duck Award became a thing, which was like who's embodied the operating values. So just like it sounds silly, but I think leaning into something that actually is like a consistent and visual reminder of culture has actually made a big difference. That's my silly example. And then
Yeah.
I think
You have
thank
a
you.
favorite duck?
Oh, we have actually the funny thing is in our Slack profile, you know how you can set custom questions? One of them is which duck are you? But mine is set as bufflehead, vanishing and resurfacing as it feeds.
Nice. I'll try to include a photo.
Of the duck.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my serious one is also, I think, with all the climate news that has happened in the last 4 years, actually, those all continue to be reminders. So, for example, I think after this last election, just because of the kind of changed regulatory stance toward climate regulation, especially in the US, I think that was a big kind of moment of uncertainty for the company. But I think I was impressed by how much we rallied around wait, this is why our mission matters more than ever. All the reasons why people are leaning into continuing to use our software and use our business more so rather
Yeah.
than backing away and seeing those early signs. Climate's somewhere where it kind of feels like you're continuously pushing a boulder up a hill. And I think making it through this latest moment together as a company was a big moment to be like, yes, we're still doing this.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then moving kind of to more advice, what do you wish founders knew about hiring or scoping early data roles? And maybe relatedly, like how has the data science role changed over time? Because I feel like there was a while where it was like the equivalent of today's AI engineer. Like it was the most popular role. Everyone was looking for it. Everyone was calling themselves a data engineer. And so two-part question, like one, advice for founders thinking about hiring for data, and then relatedly, like how has the data science role or function changed in the industry over time?
Those are great questions. On the first one, I think the most important thing is A, to have founders really bought into why data is an important role to hire for, and to have some kind of vision of what you want to do with data. Because it's so nebulous, I think if a founder doesn't have a clear vision and is like, oh, maybe I could use somebody, but like I'm not sure for what, or kind of sticks them with a random support function and is like, okay, you're over there. Versus I've seen the most success when a founder kind of has a clear idea for what data could unlock, make sure that data reports into the right places to then have the influence to achieve that vision. For example, if you want data to be core to your product, then have them report into wherever engine product report into. Don't have them report into, let's say, the business support functions, as I've seen sometimes. And that's going to help data be empowered to achieve their mission because data is one of those functions where a lot of the job is actually influencing other people. For example, with analytics or kind of clean data quality, a lot of the job in the beginning is you've got to get other teams to use and consume and do things with data the way you want. So
Yeah.
biggest tip is just to make sure you are bought in and then you've set up your first data person to be empowered to achieve what you want them to do. On shifts in the industry, well, I guess I feel like the 2010s were kind of the golden era. When especially a lot of it was around consumer tech and it was like experimentation and product analytics are the main way that you make decisions. And then you start moving up to predictive modeling and like you've got this whole beautiful data maturity stack. I think the biggest difference now is back then it did feel like kind of By the end of that period, you had data engineers, data analysts, data scientists building models, and then machine learning engineers. The spectrum of like you're piping data along through to your doing insights or almost delivering full products based on data. Now I think it's the Wild West. Like, I don't even know if I could give you a good synthesis, except that you still have all those roles, except you've also got AI thrown in the mix. And I think what that does is a couple of things. One is you do have AI engineer roles that honestly are mostly about a totally different skill set. It's about how well can you prompt LLMs. It's about how well can you do evaluations, which are similar-ish to what ML engineers have had to do. But your evaluating is very different because it tends to not be quantitative metrics, it's qualitative. And the second way I think AI has changed the landscape is that you've got two schools of thought sometimes. Some people are like, you don't even need data engineering. You don't need structured data anymore because the LMs are going to deal with everything. The other class of people, which I identify a little more closely with, is that's even more important now because it's all garbage unless you've got good structured data. You can cut out a lot of the analysts or the other kind of middle insights, but you have to invest even more into a good data foundation. So I feel like the job market's kind of all over the place, but that's, my prediction is still you'll have the AI engineers, but you also have a lot of data engineering need.
Yeah. I think that's generally consistent with what we're starting to see, like even with a lot of the cogen software, for example, which is all super impressive and helpful tools. You're now seeing like tech debt that's coming up from that and people having to reinstate some of the kind of fundamentals. So it'll be interesting to see how things evolve in the next few years. And then maybe on advice for the person who was in your shoes, you kind of been through the arc from employee number 25 to scaling now. If you were advising a friend who's about to join a Series A startup, what would you tell them?
Mm. People is like the only thing I would tell them. I think especially now that you've got so many, especially AI startups popping up, and it can be hard to, I think, assess on the outside which ones are the real deal, which ones aren't. I think more so than ever, I have been leaning into my gut on are these people ones that are trustworthy, great to work with, are going to get the job done and really succeed? So that's my biggest piece of advice. And for whoever that is, to really listen to their gut, because I think all the numbers
Yeah.
and everything can be confusing, but trust yourself when it comes to who you want to work with.
If you had to put your gut into words, are there things that you tend to gravitate towards, or is it really just all feelings and kind of the vibes?
Let me think. One of them is definitely people who are sharp, who are quick, who you can tell, I think, when you're having a conversation and it's like going really, kind of speedily back and forth. Um, and the second one is kindness is, I think, something that you can really get a feel for, even early on in a process. Just, is this person kind? Do they care? And the last one probably is honesty, transparency. I think a lot of early recruiting processes can sometimes feel like you're just getting sold. But what stood out to me about Watershed was they didn't really sugarcoat anything. There was optimism, but never kind of delusion or like a blind belief in something that wasn't backed up by more
Mm.
thoughtfulness behind it.
Yeah, those are good pointers. And then lastly, we're gonna go into a lightning round. So I'm gonna ask you, I think 5 questions, and we'll just breeze through them. Ready?
Ready.
All right. Most used app that's not Slack or Gmail.
Notes.
Favorite climate fact.
Red eyes are worse for the environment than flights you take during the daytime, which I
Hmm.
hate taking red eyes, so that's a good climate motivated reason. And the reason is because planes release these things called contrails, which are small clouds at the end. Daytime, they actually reflect back some of the sun's heat into the
Mm.
atmosphere, so they're less emissive. Whereas at nighttime, they just trap all the heat, so it's worse.
Good to know. I hate red eyes too, so now I can have another reason to not take them. What is a favorite company tradition or ritual at Watershed?
I mentioned the ducks already, but the other one is personal priorities. It's something where we gather regularly as a team, and people kind of write their docs about what are their personal priorities. And some of them are really light. It's like family, and it's photos of it. Some are a little bit more around, hey, like actually, it's important to me to be able to, work remotely once a quarter because I've got family in this place that's hard to see. Other people will say, hey, like the blocks on my calendar every Wednesday morning, that's my therapy session. And so that's why, and it's a personal priority to me.
Hmm.
So people share a range of information, but I think it
Yeah.
builds trust really quickly and is nice to get to know someone holistically.
Yeah, that's cool. And then what is one thing you'd do differently if you were joining a startup that just freshly raised their Series A today?
Ooh, okay, 2 things. One is that kinda ownership mindset flip. I think I would go through that earlier and be like, "Oh, actually, yeah, I'm kinda helping lay the foundation for what's coming after this." And the second thing is just to have more fun. I feel like I was so, like, caught up in the early days and you're grinding
Mhm.
really hard and it's a lot, but I miss those days a lot. Like, it's just a
Yeah,
fun time working on a problem with just a few people, so
nice. Um, and last question, because there's been so much discourse recently about 996,
Mm.
which I feel like isn't even a new phenomenon, but is just coming back into the zeitgeist because there's a couple of startups that are maybe louder about doing it. And I think it's more nuanced than like pro or anti 996, but what is your reaction to all of this discourse around it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Early on at Watershed, definitely like we were working more than, a standard 40-hour work week. One of the things that was so apparent was the trust in terms of, hey, like we have a lot to do and we have really ambitious goals that everybody is bought into and wants to achieve. So I would work late on, weeknights, but it would be out of a, hey, this is because I'm excited and we want to hit these goals. I think the main difference for me is just whether 996 comes from top down imposing, you've got to be here, you've got to be at your desk on a Saturday just because, if it starts tipping into performative or like you have to show up just to show your face
Yeah.
kind of realm. Versus I think the magic of the early days of a startup is no one's asking you to do it, but you're doing it
Mhm.
because you really believe in it. Like that's where you get the best results. So depends on how people use 996, but I think I fear that sometimes it's really tipping into the like you just gotta show up and show your face and it's like an obligation more so than people are excited to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to agree with your take. And it's just funny because over the weekend, at a dinner with friends, we were talking about did you hear there was a performative male competition?
Yes, I did hear about this.
I don't actually know who won it. I should like dig up their photo. But I feel like the concept of the performative male is also um emerging or back in discourse, and maybe not a coincidence that those two things are emerging at the same time.
Oh my gosh, the ultimate crossover would be the performative 996 mail. That would be
Yeah.
its own competition. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, where can listeners follow you and or learn more about Watershed?
I have an embarrassingly small social footprint, so LinkedIn. And otherwise, Watershed, we post a ton on our blog. We also post a lot on LinkedIn. So follow us there, especially if you're interested in climate and climate work.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been very fun. So thank you for your time, and excited for you to keep helping our climate change not happen so quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Tammy. Thanks so much for listening to this conversation with Tammy. I hope you found it as fun and insightful as I did. This is part of a little experiment I'm running, chatting with friends and early employees at fast growing startups about what it's really like to join early and grow with the company. If you enjoyed this conversation, would love to hear what you think. You can DM me on LinkedIn or reply wherever you saw this posted. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for the next one.